We'll start the governing body. So this is the governing body meeting as committees in common. So three CCGs, it's Bradford City, Bradford Districts, and it's Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven governing bodies. We meet in common, and it's a meeting in public there. So this is what would normally happen as a governing body, but it happens to be in public for your view and input as we come across it there. So we are, just before I start, in terms of housekeeping, there aren't any fire alarms. I'd be grateful if those who've got mobile phones could either switch them off or put them on silent for me there. I'm also aware, and people to be aware, next door, this is being transmitted next door, so there are, I'm not too sure, about 40 or 50 people next door as well who are also looking in on what's happening today there. So just as an introduction, my name is James Thomas. I'm Dr. James Thomas. I'm a GP in Skipton, and I'm the clinical chair for Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven Clinical Commissioning Group. And I'll be chairing today's governing body meeting there. There are a group of people around the table. As I say, it's made up of 3 CCGs. But the first item, which I know a lot of people are here for today, is specifically related to the Airedale, Wharfdale, Craven CCG. There are some gaps because those people who are not involved with that decision today aren't coming in today at this point. Okay, so but they'll be filled later on. As you see, there's a break. So to start off with, I have apologies. I've got one apology, but that's from Dr. Andy Withers. He's the clinical chair for Bradford Districts, and he's given his apologies today. I've got no other apologies as far as I'm aware. On the table, no, thanks, Stacey. Okay. We are core-rate as AWC CCG, so that's okay to go ahead in terms of decision-making there. And in terms of declarations of interest around the table there, I know we have one declaration of interest, which I'll come to. That's with Dr. Colin Rennick. Any other declarations of interest around the table at all there? No. So Dr. Colin Rennick, as we're aware, his wife, he's ex-GP from Settle. His wife's currently at Townhead Surgery. So there's a definite conflict of interest there because Townhead Surgery do have in the past provided services and help support Castleberg Hospital there. However, so there's a conflict of interest, and how we deal with that today is that being a GP, being of the area, around the area, has also great knowledge, and I think it's important that we are, as a governing body, aware of that knowledge there and can ask those questions. However, it's clear that he can't vote on this decision there. So I've already spoken to Colin about this. So Colin's going to step away when it comes to voting. However, I don't feel it's appropriate for him to leave the room during the discussion. He'll be here to answer questions, any clarification because of local knowledge as a ex-GP for the area. So I was just hoping around the committee, is everyone happy with that? Yeah. Any disagreement there? Great, fine. Okie doke. So the first part of our meeting today is clearly about Craven Community Services and Castleberg Community Hospital there. The way we're going to start it is we ask for questions from the public beforehand to come in by yesterday, and so we've had those questions. We're going to I'm going to read those questions out with our answers to those questions, and Helen Hurst, our accountable officer, is going to do that for us in a second there. Following those questions, we're then going to have the presentation by Sue Ketley, who's the director for the Airedale, Wharfdale, Craven Health and Care Partnership, and she's going to present the case for the governing body to then, after that, is to then question, put any points across from the governing body, be open to discussion there. From the public, we're also aware the questions have come in from the public, so as I said, we'll address those. There will be question and answer at the end of this, and therefore, during that point, if there are any points of clarification, because I'd hope that through the presentation and through some of the questions that were asked, that I hope all the points will be clarified during that time. But if there are any points of clarification required from the public, I'll take those questions there. I'm just aware there is also a time that was the meeting that has a long agenda, but we'll make sure we get all the questions and answers as much as we can. And if there are any issues that we need to address following the meeting, we'll respond to you, and I'm sure Sue will respond to any further clarification that's required that we can't say at the meeting here. We've run out of time. I'm also aware next door will have a difficulty in terms of asking questions at that point or points of clarification. So I'd ask at that point anyone next door who has a point of clarification if they could come through, yeah, preferably if there's not loads, one by one, so can ask those questions in here so we can see you here, okay? So on that point, we'll hand over to you about the questions.
Okay, so I'm going to read out the questions we've had submitted in advance. And we're doing this at this point, and a number of these will be responded to during the presentation. But if they're not been responded to adequately in your view, then you can use the points of clarification part to address those. I also should say that a lot of the answers have been prepared in the assumption that the recommendation made by the clinical executive will be accepted. So clearly, if that doesn't happen, then you know, you'll understand why the tone of the question is such, but there wasn't another way of answering it, really. Okay, so question number 1 was that has the CCG taken into account the problem of providing individual help all the time it is needed to persons living in remote rural areas, especially in adverse weather conditions when travelling would cause problems for carers, petrol expenses to pay, and possible damage to cars? So yes, we have taken into account the challenges of living in rural areas. Our consultation outcome report reflects this, the process. We also looked into the account that Health Watch North Yorkshire's Rural Access to Services report gave us that was published last year. And the clinical executive group did consider both of these when making its decision to recommend to the governing body the reopening of Castleberg. There is a link to that Health Watch North Yorkshire report on the internet, should anybody want it. Question 2. Would the CCG agree that in certain circumstances it is better for clients to be cared for at a small community hospital such as Castleberg, where several staff are working together and are able to provide the necessary care and support to each other when required? The response: yes, in some circumstances people do need additional care and support that they would not normally be able to receive in their own homes. This was also an essential part of the factors considered by the clinical executive group when making its recommendation. Question 3. Why were none of the consultation meetings held in Ingleton, which is a highly deprived community with substantial need of care services? Was this because our views are not compatible with your intention to close the hospital? There is a very real need in our community for accessible care services that Castleberg has provided successfully for many years, and I want them to continue. During the consultation, we heard and considered very strong views of people living in Ingleton and Bentham, particularly about the lack of nursing care home facilities in those areas. We have valued everyone's views, and we have considered those in detail in the consultation outcome report, including the difficulties that were expressed by people living in Ingleton and Bentham. This report was key part of the discussions held by our clinical executive. So we did hold 7 consultation meetings in 5 locations, and Sue will go into the detail of those later. It would have been impractical to hold meetings in every village and every settlement in the whole of the Craven area. We located meetings at venues along the sort of A65 spine to try and give everybody the opportunity to access one or more of them. And we also took into account some of the travelling distances across this part of the county. We tried to time meetings around bus times, but also around other activities like sort of market days and things like that to try and give people the most opportunity of trying to attend a consultation meeting. And we also took our consultation out into nursing homes so that people who don't have the opportunity to turn up to a meeting had the issues taken to them. Question 4. Can you please explain the process of how the CCG governing body is going to make this decision? So, as you can see, this is the process that we're going to make the decision by. The governing body meets in public, and it will make its decision based on the papers that are presented to it, the presentation that is made, and then the debate that follows. The governing body members are aware of the clinical executive group's recommendation and the reasons for that, but that will be tested during the debate. And on the basis of that, the governing body will then make its decision. If the governing body disapproves of the clinical execs group recommendation, please can we justify it, and would there be opportunity for the public to appeal? So if the governing body today does not support that recommendation, then this will be justified in the course of this meeting. The reasons will be made very clear, and this meeting is being filmed and recorded, as you know, so people who are unable to attend will be able to play that back. There is no appeal process directly to the CCG itself. What happens in the event of people being unhappy with the outcome of the decision, either way, it doesn't have to be in support or in objection to the recommendation, then the line is to go through North Yorkshire County Council's Health Scrutiny Committee, and then they can scrutinise the processes that we've gone through and the decisions made, and then if anybody has to call that into question, it's the Scrutiny Committee that call it into question by going up through ultimately through the Secretary of State for Health. So that's how appeals work in these instances. Question 6. If the CCG governing body approves of the clinical exec group's recommendations, please can you inform us if Airedale Hospital Trust and Townhead Surgery in Settle will continue to provide the care in Castleberg as at the pre-closure levels? If not, would the CCG tender the services out to providers to bid for them? So at this stage, we have no plan to tender any services. Airedale Hospital Trust are the leaseholder of this building, and so it has been with them our discussions have taken place in order to continue what was in place prior to the closure. Whether that will be exactly the same, I think we wouldn't commit to. You'll notice in the recommendation that it suggests that if recommendation 1 is accepted, then we need to see this in the context of the overall care model, and Sue will go into that detail. So probably yes from the beginning, but will that always be the case? Perhaps not, but there's certainly no intention to put things out to tender, which I think was probably the main body of the question. Number 7, can the CCG give us an estimate of the timescale of the repair work needed to carry out in Castleberg before it can reopen? We've been advised that it would take 6 months for repairs and the recruitment of staff to be completed, subject to the availability of workforce. Would the number of beds be the same is the next question, question 8. And with the context of my answer to the previous question around the care model and how this needs to fit in with the services that are available, then initially we're assuming the same number of beds will be provided. But whether that will always be the case, you'll note from some of the appendices that were sent out with the reports, those beds weren't always fully utilised. So, you know, there maybe needs some work done around the sort of fixed and permanent number of beds. So my numbers have gone all across now, but I think I might be on number 9. But it says number 6 on my page. Sorry. Okay, it doesn't matter. The second recommendation by the clinical executive sounds like an aspiration, rather than a concrete plan to use Castleberg as a community hub and expansion of other community services in addition to the inpatient bed facilities for intermediate and palliative care. Please could the CCG elaborate on this and if there is extra funding available to deliver this? So again, Sue will cover much of this in the presentation, but just in terms of the funding for services based at Castleberg and those offered in the community will remain unchanged. We're operating within a fixed financial envelope. So additional funding is being provided by the CCG to repair and restore the hospital building. That was our commitment at the start of the consultation to make sure that that was a viable option that we were consulting on. What we'd like to do is work with the Craven community group. That is the group of public practitioners, voluntary community services who serve the area of Craven, and look to what potential that Castleberg offers us in terms of being just more than an intermediate and end-of-life bed base, but actually could it be a community hub? Could it have VCS services in? Could it offer some alternative services? I know in other parts of the country, organisations like Age UK and things have set up some sort of services in those types of places. So yes, it is a little vague in the papers, but our meeting is about the closure or not of Castleberg. This was a additional point made by the clinical executive that they'd like us to think more broadly about the use of that facility, not just think of it purely as a bed base. Number 10, this person says I want you to be clear, this isn't me saying this, although I did. I most warmly welcome the executive recommendation of option 1 and the redevelopment of Castleberg as a community asset, providing a richer service model. In view of this, will the CCG require there to be a locally based management charged with the effective use of the site and its integration into the community? As I've just pointed out, that the site will be managed by NHS Property Services in liaison with Airedale Foundation Trust, who lease it. NHS Property Services will then implement an ongoing life cycle programme to ensure the ongoing maintenance of the building. But bearing in mind the comments I made earlier, I think we would very much welcome the community's input into the design and delivery of services that may well be in there. Number 11, I think my numbers are right. Maintenance issue caused the closure over a year ago. What arrangements will be put in place to ensure maintenance can be done straightforwardly and economically? So the issues that caused the closure will be repaired and restored while the building is empty. NHS Property Services will then implement, as I've mentioned, this ongoing life cycle programme that ensures the maintenance of the building. So I think they're committing to ensuring that they will do the necessary ongoing repairs and maintenance of the building to ensure it's fit for purpose. And number 12, how can I be assured that at least some of the views expressed in response to the consultation were positive suggestions and ideas for saving Castleberg looking to the future, if the NHS could prevent permanent closure of the facility? I know a few examples, both financial and practical, which could perhaps contribute to a rescue and transformation of the service. Well, as you will hear shortly, the recommendation is for it to continue, but again, I'd repeat that for the communities that live in and around and are served by this facility, I think you've got an open invitation by the Craven community to get involved and be part of the design and the delivery of any future service models. And that's the questions.
Thank you very much, Helen. So those are the questions that we received at Airedale Wharfdale Craven Clinical Commission Group by the end of play yesterday. So now we're going to go on to the presentation by Sue Ketley, who's the director of the Airedale Wharfdale Craven Health and Care Partnership, follow which we will then have further discussion at the governing body.
Right.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, James. I think some governing body members have joined us a little late on this journey, as we've actually been on this journey for over 12 months now, which seems a long time. However, the process that the CCG has had to go through and wanted to go through has been rigorous in terms of what commitment we had to make to our public, to our governing bodies and to NHS England. This isn't the first time Castleberg has been subject to this, and therefore that was another reason that we really wanted to ensure that the process we followed was absolutely transparent and rigorous with the general public. Now I'm going to go through a little bit of background before we actually start the actual presentation as to how the rationale for the clinical executive on making the decision that it did. Because it wasn't a simple process. There was a plethora of information that we had to consider. We also undertook a period of pre-consultation engagement to actually understand what it was the public wanted to know. What did they want us to engage with? What did they want us to consult on? And we extended that. We were originally going to do that for 3 weeks, but we extended that to 6 weeks over the summer period. And that was also in the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee in North Yorkshire wanted us to undertake a longer period. We've had to go through a number of checkpoints with NHS England, so I'm going to talk about that. Produce a decision-making business case, go through a period of consultation, which is normally 12 weeks, but we extended that because of the Christmas period. A decision-making business case would then go to the clinical executive and also to NHS England to make sure that we have gone through due national process in taking our decision. And then, of course, it will be the decision of the governing body. So that's what I'm wanting to go through today with you all. Thanks, Sue. Right, that's me. Okay. So I've just gone through future of community service in Craven, including Castleberg Hospital, and what I'm actually going to talk you through as a governing body. So just to give a little bit of background, it was in April 2017 when Airedale Foundation Trust notified us at the CCG of significant estate issues at Castleberg Hospital in Giggleswick, leading to them feeling that they were unable to provide care safely. This included frequent interruptions to the power supply in the middle of the night, heating issues in winter, and there was serious concerns with regard to the drainage, something to do with leaves getting into the drainage pipes. I'm not an architect or and some problems with sewerage. And this happened over the previous 12 months to its closure, was happening more and more frequently. So there were maintenance and engineers brought out to Castleberg, but as in the latter sort of 6-8 months, it was happening very, very frequently. So we agreed as a CCG, when the hospital is saying it is not safe, we agreed to the temporary closure of Castleberg Hospital. Immediately, we implemented an enhanced community nursing service to mitigate this risk, and expanded intermediate care beds were opened on Ward 10 at Airedale General Hospital, which wasn't ideal. We recognise that, but we felt that we had to do some to ensure that there was intermediate care facility available for Craven. We also spot purchased some beds from North Yorkshire County Council at Neville House in Gargrave and Ashfield in Skipton. What we actually wanted to do during the temporary closure is understand what impact that actually had. So gathering all the information that we needed, and looking at how many patients went through Castleberg, how many were seen by the community service, to enable us to come to some sort of picture in our head as to what would happen if we closed Castleberg, what would happen, and what impact would that have on community services. And during the period of the temporary closure, the Craven Collaborative Care Team, which is the rapid access intermediate care team in Craven, across the whole of Craven, the total visits actually went down. And the only practice that didn't follow that trend was settle. They saw some more, which we would expect. In terms of the same within the community nursing team, community nursing contacts also reduced. But the number of admissions to Ward 10 went up, so more than we would expect if Castleberg had remained open. So having undergone this temporary, analysis on the temporary closure, we considered 3 options for consultation, but prior to that, we had to go through what we call checkpoint 1 with NHS England, that actually of why we had chosen the options that we did. And originally, there were 3 options. The first option was to continue option 1, to provide inpatient care in Castleberg, in the community, and keep Castleberg Hospital open. The second one was to provide care in people's homes and actually enhance further the community teams, or in an alternative community setting like spot purchasing or ring fencing beds in local care homes, and that would permanently reclose Castleberg. And the third one was a new build, and that was excluded on the grounds of affordability. So it was pointless consulting on a new build because we couldn't afford it. We had to do whatever we did in the same cost as what we'd got.
I don't think the presentation's on the screen, on the main screen.
Oh, really?
Oh, is it?
Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away. I'm forgetting to press the button. So NHS England agreed with what we were proposing to go out to consultation and how we were going to go out to consultation in terms of determining what we were going to put in that consultation document, but also much more determined by the pre-engagement event that we undertook. So we did lots of engagement, and in terms of the activity, there was awareness raising in places like Settle Market, Skipton Town Centre, and engagement colleagues actually visiting villages across Craven to encourage local communities to complete the consultation survey and actually get involved. We had a number of media releases, and the consultation was also promoted on the CCG website. You can see the events that were held in Bentham. There were 3 in Settle, Grassington, Skipton and Gargrave. So, thanks, Sue. So in taking all that information, we were informed by NHS England that we then had to complete a decision-making business case, and that, again, what was included in that was a plethora of information that we had gathered from the consultation, the engagement, our own knowledge, local knowledge. And within that decision-making business case, which was tens and tens and tens of pages long with 20 appendices, was why were we doing this? What was the background? A case for change, options for consultation, scrutiny and assurance, and our governing body have been informed about the process as we have been going on. Obviously the public consultation, the decision making, how did this clinical executive group come in to make that decision, and actually does our decision fit in with what we're planning as a strategy for Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven? We've got to make sure that that is a fit. Okay, thank you. So within the decision-making business case, and this is an important document and everyone should have seen this, the clinical executive group focused on the following areas in terms of what we felt was important. And we really wanted to focus on the rurality and geography of the Craven community. And it was the local need, including intermediate care. So it's not just intermediate care and Castleberg, it's what other services that do we need to provide in North Craven as well as South Craven. And Helen's alluded to the local community work and models of care, which I'll come on to in a moment. We've got to make sure that whatever decision that the clinical executive came to actually addressed the patient safety concerns. That was why it temporarily closed in the first place. And also the views expressed in the public consultation, which again I will come on to. So as I alluded to earlier, the clinical executive group recommendation will have to ensure our strategic fit, and we'll have to demonstrate a rationale to satisfy our governing body members, but also NHS England's assurance process. Okay, thank you. Really, really important to us was actually understanding the rurality and geography of the Craven community. And it's got the largest, Craven is the largest of the CCG3 communities, which has over 450 square miles with a population of about circa 50. So that is significant. And when you look at Airedale and Wharfdale and the rest of the Bradford district and city, that's combined with 151 square miles compared with 450 for Craven. So as a clinical executive, we cannot ignore that in terms of access and services for the people. Okay, thank you. Is it gone? Yeah. We also considered, I've just said, the largest geographic footprint of the 3 CCG communities. But Craven is also in the top 10 lowest densely populated councils in England. Rural landscape, transport, issues for individuals requiring intermediate care. And one of the big areas during the engagement and the consultation, we had engaged with North Yorkshire County Council, who said we could have additional beds in Limestone View in Settle, and we were looking to 3 to 4 beds. It materialised that if option 2 was chosen, that's the community-based intermediate care beds, then Limestone View we could only secure 1 bed initially, and it would depend when any others became available, and there was also some capital building work that would be required. So that made it an issue for us in terms of where would we provide intermediate care if beds were required in North Craven. There was also lots of issues and concerns associated with transport facilities, and that just wasn't by the public. It was about, not on carers, it was with staff as well and other professionals, and concerns expressed by the Bentham group of the impact of residents in Bentham and Dingleton if option 2 was chosen. So, if we can go on to the next one, thank you. So local need, we again then assessed within the decision-making business case the local need for intermediate care in Craven. And our public health colleagues supported us by saying the population growth in the over 65s in Craven exceeds the national average and will continue to grow. The average age of the patients in Castleberg have been over 70. We think there has been an increase in the need for community-based beds since the temporary closure of Castleberg, and we saw that by the increase in admissions to intermediate care in Ward 10. We've also done a needs assessment for Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven on the number of beds that we think going forward, taking into account our new models of care, what a profile of how many beds we think we would need across Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven. And the analysis has shown that we would probably need 66 beds. And during the temporary closure, 55 have been available, but none of those in Craven, apart from the spot purchase. So should the beds or the option 2 be chosen as a decision by the governing body, and Castleberg was to permanently close, the local community bed base for intermediate care cannot confidently be met. So I'd just like to go into a little bit more about the views to the governing body expressed in the public consultation. We had an overwhelming response to the consultation, in whether it be online, filling out the questionnaire, the attendance at the engagement events, and in total just under 1,700. In total, just over 1,500 were in favour of option 1, 81 in favour of option 2, and 77 wasn't that bothered. The main things that came out was, there were 3 main themes that came out in the consultation across the whole of what we gathered. And the first one was that about Castleberg itself and its place in the community, and the concern of losing that community and service. Big concerns about the geography, environment and infrastructure. So we've just talked about transport links, the professional staff having to drive over 450 square miles. Is that actually feasible if we're putting that in the community? And there were real concerns, read the community care, could that actually be delivered? There were concerns around palliative care and end-of-life care, and could that always be undertaken in someone's own home. That would be preferable, but sometimes it's not possible. And the nearest palliative care is Manorlands in Oxenhope, and I can't remember the name of the one in Lancaster. St John's, is it? St John's. So those were mainly the views expressed, those three main areas that we had to take into consideration and into our decision-making business case to assure NHS England and certainly assure our governing body. I talked about us having to go through some NHS England 5 tests of service reconfiguration. And this was through checkpoint 2. So what we have to demonstrate in the decision-making business case that we met the five. The first one was strong public and patient engagement, which I think, yes, I think we did that. Consistency with current and prospective need for patient choice. Well, we've seen the views expressed in the public consultation. A clear clinical and evidence-based. And what we did appoint, which I perhaps should have said at the beginning, we appointed the Clinical Senate to go through the 2 options, the 2 models of care, just to see would that be a strong clinical fit. Now, they didn't say that either of them wasn't, but there was a stronger favour of option 2. But they didn't have, at that time, all the evidence base that we gathered since that. So we did have a clear clinical evidence base. Support for proposals from commissioners, well, that's us. However, in relation to option 2, when the clinical executive were considering all the information that had been gathered, when the NHS England 5th test is put to the test, patient care test for hospital bed closures, we applied that to the view of the clinical executive group in that they were not sufficiently assured with option 2 meeting that 5th statement, which is to demonstrate that sufficient alternative provision, such as increased GP or community services, is being put in place alongside or ahead of bed closures, and that the new workforce will be there to deliver it. They didn't feel confident that was being met with option 2. The reason being for that is there are workforce problems there, especially recruiting in rural areas. But in option 2, there are a lot of the staff work in isolation and have to travel 450 square miles across each of those teams, whereas we felt that the staff based in Castleberg or an enhanced service in Castleberg had that peer support. They're in one area, it's more sustainable, which is why we felt we weren't assured in option 2 that criteria would be met. So just to point out, the NHS England, we compiled the decision-making business case, and that business case with all the appendices had to actually go to the Yorkshire and Humber Service Reconfiguration Oversight Group. And they considered the decision-making business case and the clinical executive group's rationale for making the recommendation and advised that they were conditionally assured. And that was around they wanted further assurance of sustainability and viability of the proposed option, which I'll come into in a moment, and agree that the decision adheres to the Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven CCG strategy. And again, I will come that in a moment. We've had our quarter for assurance meeting and we were informed they were now given that information, which I will come on to, they were fully assured. In terms of the sustainability and viability of the option proposed, the current cost for services within Castleberg, revenue cost is £650,000 and the capital cost is £250,000, so that's like the rent. We hand that over to Airedale Hospital, who then pay NHS Property Services. What NHS Property Services have informed us is that over the next 20 years to maintain and get into working order Castleberg Hospital will cost £1.2 million. That's £60,000 a year. Now, prior to consultation, our clinical executive and was supported by the governing body, felt that 60,000, although it's a cost pressure, was not unaffordable. We could not discount that option to keep Castleberg open for £60,000 a year, which is why it went forward. It hasn't been built into, I want to assure our finance lay members, it has not been built into our financial plan for 18-19, but will be in 19-20 going forward. However, because it's going to take at least 6 months to get Castleberg open again with staffing, at least 6 months, we believe that the 60,000 for this year is affordable from the 650,000. NHS Property Services, although there will be something like £250,000 needed up front to do the repairs to Castleberg, NHS Property Services have assured our finance colleagues that they will do the 1.2 million over 20 years, so it is £60,000. So NHS England were assured of that, and that agreeing with the decision to add to Airedale, Wharfdale, Craven strategy, they were also assured, because we talked to them around our Craven community and new models of care, which I'm going to come on to when making the recommendation to the governing body. So the recommendation of the clinical executive group to the governing body is option 1. And the clinical executive recommend that the service model takes full account of the Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven strategy for integrating care in the community. Now, the care in the community, we have 3 communities, Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven, and that is a multidisciplinary group that's looking at the demographics in each of those areas and includes the voluntary sector, local authority, fire, police, housing, doctors, nurses, and they are saying to us that they want to design a new model. Now, some of that will need a bed base in terms of what they want to do, but it's not like for like with Castleberg. It cannot be just a step down intermediate care facility with a little bit of step up as well. We have got to use and get the communities to own that building, and not only that building, those services, and use what are the community assets that we have got in North Craven, in Gargrave, what are they that we actually deliver a different model. So that work has already been done. That group's been meeting for some time, and we'd welcome communities getting more involved in that and looking at designing the model so it isn't a medical and nursing model only. It's looking at the whole person of what care they need in that community. And we feel that is really, really exciting to do that. Now, I can answer any questions on that. I could talk about that forever, and certainly Janet Hargreaves, who's leading it in the yellow dress there, can certainly talk about Craven Community, as she's leading that from the CCG. But I'd like to just quickly, before I finish, in terms of the recommendation to the executive group with regard to option 1, just to give you a little bit of rationale as to how they actually came to that decision and why they had a bit of a lack of assurance of option 2. I think some of the rationale, which I'm going to talk to you about now, is the intended alternative bed provision in Limestone View did not materialise. During the temporary closure of Castleberg, individuals from Craven were more admitted to Ward 10, so there is a need at this moment. It might not be the same need of what we're going to produce, but there is still a need for that. We felt option 2 model requires professionals to work in autonomy in the community setting, and this requires an enhanced level of practice. And we we didn't feel assured, because again of the rurality, that there was the work for recruitment or resilience to actually implement Model 2, which is an enhanced community intensive to keep patients at home. That's what we are aiming for. That's what we're aiming for, but at this moment in time, not. We felt that the inpatient model in option 1 allows for more peer support, as I've said, and more team working. And that may be attractive to staff who actually would prefer that rather than to work in isolation. And with the broad geographic spread, rurality in access, an increased volume of people with more complex needs, and the lack of an intermediate care step up or step down facility, there was concerns around the efficiencies around that too. Data analysis of the activity undertaken in the community during the temporary closure indicates that in the communities the overall activity actually reduced and the inpatients into Ward 10 went up during that period, which again demonstrated the need for intermediate care beds. And I think we didn't feel that the opportunity to test the resilience of our option 2, we felt there perhaps was an opportunity just to test that out of the alternative model to enable people to safely remain at home, because that was a concern, had not really been realised, or that opportunity had not been taken during the temporary closure. So that was just some of the rationale. I don't know whether colleagues want to add any more to that, but it's really important. What I'd like to say to the governing body that we can seize in the decision making for option 1, that we have a fantastic opportunity to create something different in Craven, and certainly the view of the Craven community group felt that there was, and this isn't just about Settle, this is about Craven. We've got an opportunity that perhaps couldn't be missed. But as Helen said, it's earlier on, it's not, we don't want it like for like, and that was the recommendation of the clinical executive, not to just open 10 beds and do exactly the same. We've got to enhance it and do more for the whole. Yep, thank you.
Did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I think it was just to emphasise the point that Sue made. I think one of the things we really debated was that 12 months is quite a long time to be able to establish a better and a different offer. And all that happened, I guess, during that 12 months was what we feared would happen, which was more people would find themselves in Airedale Hospital, which is a great place, you know, if you live that side, but, you know, for want of a facility. So we knew quite early during the consultation, I think, that there was starting to be a strong case for beds in this locality because of all the reasons that have been mentioned. And I think that case was strengthened by not seeing the development of an alternative community offer, which told us that we weren't ready for that yet. That doesn't mean we won't ever be ready. But given the NHS workforce challenges as they are, then I think it's probably you know, unlikely that within a short space of time that option will be ready. So that sort of played heavily into our discussions in formulating that recommendation, even though we knew it was a little counter to the strategy that we were articulating around care and close to people's homes. But then sometimes you have to go with where you are, and you have to go with, you know, famous Mr. Morrison once said, if your strategy is not right, change your strategy. You know, you've got to think about the sort of the fine-tuning of that strategy and think through different alternatives. So that was probably quite a major part of our decision-making, was that's the year we've had to try it, hasn't quite got there. So on our, you know, let's use that as a reasonable judgment as to how ready we are.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Sue. That was very in-depth, and it's a true reflection of what happened. So governing body, I think what you've heard is kind of the reason for the temporary closure of Castleberg Hospital. You heard about the engagement period, you heard about the consultation period. You heard about the decision-making business case. and then how the clinical executive group came to its recommendation and the rationale there. And also to be assured that NHS England have had oversight of this as well there, really. So really it's coming down to kind of a discussion, debate, and any further points from the governing body to start off with. So I'll open it up. Any questions?
Can I
Bruce?
ask a question about resilience? So since Castleberg is owned by NHS Property Services, we're talking now about obviously an annual investment, but an investment of services in the Castleberg site. How confident are we that we've got a reasonable length of time with Castleberg being maintained, being looked after, and not going to be having a similar discussion 2, 5, 6 years? Because it doesn't belong to us in the end. The future of the building is slightly out of our hands.
Yes. It's me. Thanks, Bruce. We've also had that discussion as a clinical executive, and Castleberg is an old building. So is Airedale Hospital an old building. So is Bradford Royal Infirmary an old building. And it's just really, we have to take a bit of a leap of faith. This is what we've said we've done. This is what NHS Property Services have told us. But we don't know next week if the roof fell through in Airedale Foundation Trust. We wouldn't know. So you're right to ask the question. But I think what we've got to take is the assurance from NHS Property Services and actually have Airedale Hospital keep on top of them in terms of the maintenance programme and the maintenance plan. But you're quite right to raise it.
We're not directly going to be involved in the maintenance. It's going to be Airedale.
It'll be Airedale
so it's
with
sort
NHSP.
of slightly by proxy, so we're going to have to be a bit careful with that.
Yeah.
But that's the same with everything we
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's
everything
the nature of the beast, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just it seems a slight risk.
Right.
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 questions for clarity, if I may. The first one is around the key 5 tests, Sue, and particularly the one around the clear clinical evidence space, where I think you said that we'd commissioned the Clinical Senate for Yorkshire and Humber
Yes.
to review this.
Yeah.
And I think you said that their recommendation was that option 2 provided a better clinical evidence space than option 1.
But yes.
Could you tell me why that's changed?
I think because they didn't say that option 1 wouldn't either. So in their recommendation, they said option 2, in terms of their views, and they didn't have all the information, they felt could be a viable option, but they didn't say option 1 wouldn't be.
But they did prefer option 2, that they felt there was a stronger clinical evidence base for that.
In the strategic direction we're
That's where we're aiming for.
But I think going back to what Helen was saying, and I think the reason why we've gone against that view is because are we ready there yet? At this point, are we at that point? We could confidently say, yes, that's the right thing. And I think the exec felt that wasn't the right thing, we weren't ready.
So that leads on to my second question.
I think the context for the NHS England side of this process is a starting assumption that you're going to close. And so the alternative is what gets tested more thoroughly through that process. So there's the way the clinical senate look at what you've got, they sort of assume there's an evidence base for what you've got because it's what you've got. So they test your second option, which is your alternative to close, which is your, if you close, what you're going to do, is that a sound option? Because the vast majority of things that go through that process are a recommendation to close. And so they test what's in its place. So I don't think you do get quite a balance.
Okay.
And that would have been our experience through the whole of the way NHS England's assurance process worked. The assurance tends to lead towards what would in this case be option 2, and whether that's a sound option in order to justify option 1.
Okay, well, my second question, which leads on from that, is that, of course, you were saying that nothing's really happened to change the model of care in the last 12 months. But I suppose the question for me then is, have we actively tried to commission something different in the short term? And maybe we haven't. But if we had an extra £250,000, which is currently locked up in buildings per annum, or the further £60,000 per annum that we're going to spend, how would that change the potential for the service that could be provided subsequently? And has that been tested?
What option 2 was designed to do. So we had the 650,000 during the closure of temporary closure of Ward 10. We did not withhold that money from Airedale Hospital. What we actually wanted them to do, because of the temporary closure of Castleberg, to enhance the services in the community using that 650,000.
Sorry, but I'm talking about the £250,000
£250,000
that's the premises cost, and the potential further £60,000 per annum that's additional premises cost on top of that.
So in relation to the estates cost, in some senses, that's been left with Airedale Trust over the last 12 months, so we've left that for them, and they've actually used that on some of the other buildings, and in some senses, there is still some cost to keeping Castleberg Hospital, so there's been some security costs.
Yeah.
There's been some things
So,
to
sorry,
maintain the
I'm
building,
not so
but
much...
your money, if we used it differently.
Yeah, my argument is that there would be I think what we're being told is the argument for keeping intermediate care beds, which there seems to be a demonstrable case for in Castleberg, outweighs the potential reinvestment of £250,000 or £310,000 in an alternative service model that would provide better value.
So what we haven't had, Brian, so in some senses, we've had conversations with Airedale Trust about using the 650k differently. They've not been able to get the workforce to use that differently on community services without us then saying we can add some more money onto that to make it different. So we've had no confidence in them spending the 650k and being able to use that on community services. So it's not been a question of, well, if we gave you some more, could you do something different? Because we haven't had that
confidence.
We haven't had that confidence in even the 650k that's spent on staffing currently. Does that help?
It does.
Do you have a third question? Or can we move on?
No, I wrapped two of them together.
Neil, were you saying anything? No. Okay.
I mean, my sort of questions are maybe more observations, really, in the sense that we are where we are because it's a buildings maintenance issue. And picking up Bruce's point, really, going forward, if we're continuing to, you know, if we're adopting option 1, there needs to be a process through the sort of line of command, if you like, us commissioning from Airedale, but Airedale, more importantly, in terms of their relationship with property services, to ensure that the Castleberg building is properly maintained, because it doesn't come necessarily as a surprise to you, you know, that there's an issue needs doing. The estate should be valued in terms of categories A to D every year, and you would know that work was building up there. So, yeah, I mean, I understand the point, but I think the observation is it's something about making sure that maintenance is properly done in a timely manner.
Okay.
And we have followed those conversations up, Neil, with both Airedale Trust and NHS Property Services to make sure that happens.
So I've got Pam and then Angie.
Thank you. And I mean, I'd like to start by thanking the public really for their engagement in this whole process. Not only have they helped us sort of see the issues in relation to Castleberg, but some of the extra issues that are faced by rural community. And I think going forward, just to begin with, I'd like to perhaps see a little bit more of an analysis of some of the themes that have come out of there of issues that are then going to be presented to the Craven group so that we can map some of those through to see how they work. But so the second part to that is, although we've looked at the majority view here, there was a minority view as well, articulated, mainly I think from the south areas you might expect of the Craven district, where there were issues raised about inaccessibility of Castleberg beds. And this is obviously an issue, given that 51% of the occupancy of those beds in the previous year was residents of South Craven. So, you know, I wonder how we're going to address that little bit for the residents of Skipton. You might say there is greater flexibility there in terms of nursing home beds and the ability to develop that. But if that's the case, does that then have a knock-on effect in terms of Castleberg occupancy levels and therefore in terms of viability going forward?
No, I suppose, as Sue mentioned, the expectancy of life in terms of our ageing population, number of beds is going up in the community likelihood. So therefore, even if there are numbers down of South Craven patients coming into Castleberg, because we have a residential home that's homes that are possible down in the Skipton base, the numbers going out into the community who may require beds is probably going to still be increasing in this area to compensate for that, maybe that reduction of South Craven patients going in there. And it's about looking at that financial envelope, isn't it, as well?
Yes, because although we might have increasing demand, is it about affordability? But I do think we need to take on board too that minority view and not ignore that, again, in terms of looking at the Craven community development there, because there was a consistent theme going through their responses, even though they were very much in the minority.
I think the decision was taken on the back of what happened over the winter as well, and that NHS recommendations for acute hospitals is for them to have something like 88% occupancy, I think, whereas for Airedale to be under 95% is quite a luxury. So I don't think they're ever going to be short of patients who need to come to Castleberg.
Okay. Angie.
I think if I've read this correctly, when we talk about 12 people per month going in with a 20-day average length of stay, that works out to my calculation at almost 8 bed years, 8 beds years. So there isn't that much scope for increase, really. If we then said that we expect activity to run at about 160 patients a year, you're up at 9 out of the 10 beds being fully utilised. So in that regard, I think the almost case is made for the utilisation of it.
Yeah. Angie.
Just really to support option 1 as a career-long supporter of community hospitals. I see the value that they add to rural communities particularly. And I suppose my aspiration would be that option 2 is not excluded, but we invest in both if and when we ever have the money to do so.
Okay.
Could I just add to something to that? I think that's a really important point, because as you described some of the problems that you have with workforce and support and skill of level of workforce and so on, we mustn't forget that in looking at these models, what those beds are looking at a relatively short period in patient care pathway and so on. So we have to make absolutely certain, no matter which option we go for and so on, that we continue to invest and develop those real community services.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, Pam, I think that's absolutely right, which is why the Craven model is so unique in that within the Craven community group, we have the fire service, we have housing, we have the police, and what they're actually coming to the conclusion is there's lots of people going in lots of people's houses that actually, why can't the firefighter who goes in to fit the smoke alarm do a falls assessment on someone? So it's building, it's not just immediately thinking we've got to invest more money. It's actually what are the community assets we've got and are we using them to our best advantage? So that's what the communities are doing, and we want to strengthen that across the whole of Craven and use the Castleberg beds actually are an enabler to help us do that in that short period so we can get people home as quickly and safely as possible.
Peter.
Yeah, just before, lest we forget, the consultation wasn't a referendum. And as it happens, option 1 is the right choice, but it might not have been. And would have been taking a difficult decision today, but it is the right choice. And the second thing to say is that not only do the people in Craven want option 2, but people all over our patch want option 2, in addition to the choices we make today. And so we deal with the people who would have voted against if it was a referendum, by actually developing the community services for everybody. And it doesn't matter whether you live in Skipton or Ingleton or Keighley or wherever, we need the same level of care at home available. Just so happens that we also need the 12 beds at Castleberg as well. So it's not, this isn't a process of disenfranchising anyone or giving some people a better service at the expense of others. It's about doing the right thing as we are today, and then doing the work to make sure that we do the right thing going forward for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Any other questions around the table at all from the governing body? Okay, so I'm just going to open out to the public in terms of any points of clarification. And again, I'm aware of next door, so if there's anyone next door who wants any points of clarification, if they want to come through.
Can I just make one point? So I skipped over a question. I do apologise. It's in my desire to answer 2 questions with 1 answer. It's a quickie because we can't answer it here, so, but I need just for the record to at least have shared it. In the interests of the desired collaborative working, can I be assured the protocol standards and costings of the social care service provided by North Yorkshire County Council for Craven residents will be commensurate with that provided for residents in other AWC CCG areas? Well, given this is well out of our jurisdiction, this issue needs to be taken up by whoever asked the question with North Yorkshire County Council. So, but I didn't want to just miss that question out completely.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Any clarification points from the floor at all? There's one.
If option 1 is considered, how many beds would there be in Castleberg?
I think we said there would be the similar numbers of beds to start off with, 12, so it'd be the same as before. So we'd be starting off where just before Castleberg was temporarily closed. And I think the discussion also was said about how in the future it would depend on the models that develop there. Sorry, it's 10. Is it 10? Sorry, did I say 12?
It was 12. It was 12 and it reduced to 10.
10, sorry.
It will be a little bit conditional on being able to replace a full complement of staff.
Yeah.
We've got to bear in mind that there will have been an 18-month period where staff have gone elsewhere or done other things, so that we should have some cautions about being absolutely committee tax. We've got to make sure we can put back a full complement of staff, and we keep talking about workforce as being an issue. I mean, the feeling is, Colin tells me, that people are likely to come back and want to work in Castleberg. But there is a slight caution about that, isn't there?
I think there's no second point.
It seems an excellent idea to widen the scope of option 1 as the group has decided to include fire service, police and what have you, and low community. Could I have an assurance that this process will not be slowed down by bringing in the other services?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That group has been going for about 9 months already, so it won't slow it down, it'll speed it up.
Can I ask about NHS property services? Because my understanding is that that's relatively recent and it's coming with Secretary of State Jeremy Hunt or whatever. So before that, who owned Castleberg and what were you paying? As this amount you've got to pay to NHS property services gone up a lot. Were we paying rent before or what? I don't understand that.
I'll hand that over to Julie.
Okay, so when CCGs were created through the health reforms, previous to that, primary care trusts were allowed to hold estate and owned buildings. I'm not sure where Castleberg sat, if it was owned by the PCT prior. Was it owned? So it was owned by North Yorkshire
PCT.
So it was owned by a PCT previously. So the reforms meant that all estate that was owned by PCTs were passed over to NHS property services. So that was a decision outside our making. I haven't got the numbers that were paid then.
But were you paying then? When was this PCT?
So if in the primary care trust will have owned the building, so won't have needed to pay rent.
Right.
So there would have been a calculation of what would that cost have been, because even in owning the building, there would have still been some estate charges that we would need to pay to maintain that building. In some senses, with the reconfiguration, the costs that the PCT held were passed over to NHS Property Services.
if you go back, say, 15 years, the Primary Care Trust owned, commissioned and provided the service. And that, at one point, the government said it's not right for somebody to both commission and provide the services. So then they had to find somebody else to provide them. And that's when Airedale became the providers, again, of the services there. So I don't know what the arrangement between Airedale providing and the Primary Care Trust owning the buildings was. It's very complicated. And that's probably why the building's in the state it is, because its ownership's changed several times in a lot of years.
Okay. Anyone in the other room at all? Do you know? No one's coming through.
Is anybody there? Yeah.
No one? Right. There's one.
There's always one. We know the system works.
Yeah, it does work.
I'm hoping this is a fairly quick one. You're recording it. You're recording this meeting. When will it be available and where will it be available, including all the OHP and that fancy stuff which Sue presented?
Well done, Sue.
It will be available in the next few days on our website, which is at the Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven CCG website. We'll put a link to it from the front page of the website so that you can easily access it.
Great, that's fine.
Oh,
Could you repeat that, Sue, into the microphone?
it's going to be on the Airedale Wharfdale.
I didn't hear where it's going to be available.
So it's going to be available on the Airedale Wharfdale Craven Clinical Commission Group website. And it'll be available in probably about 2 to 3 days' time. Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about, or inquire a little bit about NHS Property Services Limited. I went to 2 of the meetings and I felt that I was the only person at the meeting who'd read the annual report of the NHS Properties Limited and its website. And the conditions under which NHS Property Limited operates are very different from what I read in this report here. It's not a benign institution. It's taken over the capital of the NHS and separated it from the services it provides.
That's right.
It is entitled to rent back, and I used the word lease, but I saw on the stuff I saw rent back. What it does is requisition the properties from the Primary Care Trust, whoever it was, requisition them, and then is entitled to rent them back initially at a low rate or reimbursed rate until they pay a market rent for the properties. Am I correct? Can someone from...
Yes, that's correct. That's
okay.
correct.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I read this a year ago and I was all au fait, but when I went to the meetings, I found that the people there weren't au fait. And how it all worked. They can rent back, and also what they do is if they can identify unused parts, set at, as I understand, at Castleberg, they can also rent those out separately to make more money.
Yes.
And that's where I think the creative side of NHS properties could come in. If they can offer creative things to do. And I've also read the bios of every single one of the directors of the NHS Properties Limited. And you can see, do you know there's only one on there who has a health service background? They're not people like you and I. These are estate agents, bankers and people from the city who have different motives. And so I would urge you to be very careful with what happens with NHS properties, because they are free. I believe that this money which you've got, the 250,000, 60,000, I worked it out actually £67,000. I just took a straight figure, £1 million to get it back on the road, 3% interest per year over 20 years, and that's £67,000 a year. I had to do that in my previous job, those sort of quick thinking. It's very easy to work out most of these figures. A bed in Airedale, I think the NHS figures cost £440 a week. A bed at Castleberg should be about £220 a week. It's all there. I can tell you how much it costs to run a nurse. But I don't see these figures coming out at present, and I think they're what might trip you up in 5 or 10 years' time. Because if NHS properties really should be agglomerating all this and charging you for the lease, a single fee for the rent or lease or whatever it is, which covers all these other things. I don't think you have to bother about whether it's 60 or 70,000, what the on-costs are, all the things that go with a big company. And believe you me, the on-costs of a big company are enormous.
Okay.
I would say 30%, I would say add at least 30% to that 60,000 a year on cost, just my own guess. And then you've got VAT, then you've got commissions, oh my goodness. And in 5 years' time, it may be, the NHS properties may be overcome by it, and just put the rent up. Just put the rent up, because they're a private company. And by the way, as a private company, they do not give the money to this directly. And the report implies it goes directly to the Secretary of State for Health. It doesn't. It goes into the revenue and the capital account of the company. It is a company wholly owned by the Secretary of State, but he is the shareholders. That's where the money goes to, into the capital base and revenue of the company.
Okay.
Last year, by the way, they made £20 million profit. They boast about that on the website. There's money slushing around in that company, by the way. I don't know why we're worried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just comment on that? So it's probably fair to say we don't have a choice of how the NHS is configured. So we work with NHS Property Services and we have got the assurances we can, but they are a publicly owned company. They're not a private company. They are a public owned company, but we have no choice. NHS Property Services own the NHS estate.
Okay, right. I need to come...
I accept you have no choice. But since 2014, when these figures were produced, Craven has gone broke. We know your finance people knew Craven was in difficulty. Mighty is in a bad way at present. Interservice in a bad way at present. The whole financial picture has changed since 2014. The whole idea of the way we buy our services must change. If only what's happened to Craven. That should be part of the financial model. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we could
It's
discuss
national
further.
policy.
Yeah. Okay. So, as a governing body for Airedale, Wharfdale, Craven, CCG, we need to come to a decision. So, the recommendation from the Clinical Executive Group to the governing body has been option 1. The Clinical Exec recommend that the service model takes full account of the AWC CCG strategy for integrating care and community, and really it's to the governing body about whether that decision is made and whether you agree with that or not. So from AWC,
Yes.
any dissent at all? Okay, so AWC CCG agree with option 1. I want to take that forward. So thank you very much. I think I'd... Thank you very much. Just an opportunity really at the end just to thank for all those who've been involved. Specifically at the CCG, I'd like to thank Sue on my side here, Lynn Scrutton and Sue Jones for all their tirelessly work, engagement and to do due diligence in the whole process really there. I also want to kind of thank the major stakeholders who've been contributed to it, specifically Airedale Foundation Trust, North Yorkshire County Council, Health Watch, Townhead Surgery, NHS Properties, although I'm not too sure after that discussion there. But lastly, I'd like to thank the population of AWC, and specifically Craven, but more specifically North Craven. I'm a GP in Craven. I thought I understood what Castleberg meant to my patients, but it's clear that over this past 12 months, that feeling has been a lot stronger. I've been at these engagement meetings. I've spoken to many of you and plenty of others, and heard the passion of what Castleberg has meant to the community and to the individual. I think today has shown that the CCG has listened to the community, but I thought also it's important that the governing body have also been assured by the process that we've gone through there. And really, I think we can all learn from this process. I think myself, as I said, as an individual, as a GP, have learnt a lot. I think as a commissioning group, we have learnt a lot about our communities, and hopefully our communities have learnt a lot about us as commissioners of a healthcare system for this area. And I think it's upon us all, and I include the public and I include the commissioning group, and all the other stakeholders to take this forward, because I don't think it's like for like. I think it's about developing things. It's about evolution, the evolution of our health and care, It's about the well-being of our population, the holistic approach there, because we know health is only 10% of our well-being. It's all the other determinants in life that contribute to our health and well-being. So thank you very much for all your support and your input. I'm just going to leave it on one person. I'm going to leave it to, because we've kept him quiet, although he did have one say, and that's Colin Rennick, Dr. Colin Rennick. I think you want to have a last comment, didn't you, really, as an ex-GP of the area and been involved with this?
Well, I think you said most of what I was going to say, actually, but I'll just say within the decision that's been made, there's a challenge there for the people of North Craven. I know you've got the community spirit to do it. I'm sure you've got you're blessed with a fabulous piece of property at Castleberg, and you can make something great of it. I know your Facebook page is called Castleberg the Future, and I hope the future for Castleberg will start today, and it'll go on to great things that, if we are in the circumstances again, about thinking, do we spend money on this building? And it'll be a no-brainer to say yes. Thank you.